It was seen that armies from the Holy Empire were expanding their territory to a village where the Gal tribe lived. Night had fallen when the group of armies led by Pastor Drok arrived in the village. The men in the village were hunting, so it was the perfect time to launch an attack. The whole village was strangely much quieter than it should be. That was when a girl named Riannon appeared in front of them. Pastor Drok knew the figure in front of him. She was a descendant of the elven king Duel. By making the girl a living sacrifice, Drok could resurrect the demon king Avalon. It turned out Drok was ordered to seal the demon king's tomb because of a dangerous prophecy, but he intended to resurrect the demon king and rule the world with him. Because of that, he asked Riannon to volunteer to become a living sacrifice. At first, Riannon didn't want to, but after Drok captured 2 small children and threatened to kill them, Riannon was finally willing to follow Drok. Meanwhile, Arthur and the men from the Gal tribe were hunting in the forest. During the hunt, Arthur got a bad feeling. When he and his group returned to the village, they were told by 2 small children that Riannon had been arrested. Not wanting his little sister to suffer harm, Arthur then invited the villagers to save her. They rushed to the location targeted by Drok. It turned out that Drok and his group went to a cave. There, they faced a very high staircase. It was at the top of the stairs that the tomb of the demon king Avalon was located. Drok began the ritual of resurrecting the demon king Avalon. Meanwhile, outside, Arthur and his group had arrived. They took action and beat Drok's subordinates. But amid the fight, a mysterious light suddenly appeared from the center of the cave and spread throughout the forest. Drok had finished carrying out the spirit summoning ritual. The demon king appeared and hovered over his grave. Drok greeted and offered Rhiannon as a living sacrifice. He said that Riannon was a descendant of the last elven king Duel. He offered Rhiannon, and in exchange, Drok asked Arwen to give him the power to jointly rule the world. The demon king's spirit descended the stairs and his form took on the appearance of a human. He walked over to Riannon. Meanwhile, Arthur, who saw the incident, immediately ran to try to stop whatever was going to happen. Arthur's appearance shocked everyone there. Drok asked Arthur to leave so as not to disturb the ritual. Arthur, of course, didn't want to and wanted to save his sister. Riannon was the village head's daughter, and whoever married her would become the village head. Because of this, Arthur believed that Drok wanted to kill Rhiannon so that the village chief's descendants would disappear. Unfortunately, Riannon was affected by Drok's magic, so that her consciousness was controlled. Rhiannon's original consciousness was trapped in her subconscious. That was when Avalon spoke to her in her subconscious. He gave his eyes and ears so that Rhiannon could see what was happening in the real world. Avalon also said that if she didn't want her brother to get hurt, the girl had to wake up immediately. With Avalon's help, Rhiannon managed to take over her consciousness. That way, Rhiannon was free. Avalon immediately killed Drok. After Drok died, Arthur pointed his sword at Avalon. Rhiannon tries to stop him, but Arthur didn't care. He came forward and dueled with Avalon. Amazingly, Arthur could match the Demon King's abilities. Rhiannon also prevented Arthur from fighting further. Rhiannon said she wanted to marry Avalon and make him head of the village. Arthur was annoyed because he couldn't do anything more. Not long after that, hundreds of living skeletons appeared and attacked them. Like it or not, Arthur had to work together with Avalon and fight all the enemies. Even so, the number of living skulls was still too many. Luckily, an old man named Ogum appeared and showed him the secret path. It turned out that both Arthur and Avalon knew Ogum. Unfortunately, the living skulls also surrounded the secret passage. They fought against a group of skulls. Surprisingly, Avalon was very weak and easily injured during the fight. Ogum said that Avalon was resurrected prematurely, so his strength had not yet recovered. After fighting their way through the tunnel, they soon arrived. Outside, the villagers were already welcoming them. From then on, Arthur decided to lead a rebellion against the Holy Empire. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, a man named Gaius got a report from his men. They received news that Drok was trying to resurrect the Demon King by kidnapping the village chief's daughter, Rhiannon. Because of this action, Drok was killed. Initially, Gaius thought that Arthur had killed Drok, but he was told that the Demon King had killed him. As a result of this incident, the Gal tribe decided to rebel. Gaius said that rebellion could not be forgiven. He prepared to travel to the Gal tribe. Gal tribe was on Aran Island. One night, Arthur invited all the villagers to leave Aran Island and move to the more prosperous island Albion. All the residents cheered and immediately got ready to leave. Meanwhile, Aran was attacked by a girl named Morgan. They fought because of misunderstandings, but Aran easily defeated her. Arthur then met them and asked what happened. Morgan looked remorseful and apologized to Arthur. She had failed to carry out Arthur's orders. It turned out that Morgan had lost the ship they were going to use to go to Albion. Arthur was disappointed and wanted to punish her, but Aran stopped Arthur. Instead of punishing her, it was better for them to make a plan. He also said that after defeating Morgan, she would be under his protection. Arthur agreed with this and immediately planned the ship's journey back. The next day, they went to the shipport area. They were guarded by Imperial soldiers. Both of them also said that it would be futile to seize the ship because the gate to the open sea was closed. Because of that, Aran asked them to split up. He, Arthur, Riannon, and Morgan would take care of the gate. Meanwhile, Ogum and the others had to seize the ship. They then separated and launched continuous arrow attacks at the enemy to open the way. After overcoming the enemy, they all managed to open the gate. Now it was their turn to reclaim the ship. Gaius appeared while clapping his hands. When Gaius appeared, Aran asked him to be left alone. After being alone with Gaius, they chatted. Gaius immediately asked whether Aran was the demon king who would destroy the world. Aran casually answered that he did not need to do that. Gaius took something from under his robe and then threw a holy knife at Aran. However, Aran easily deflected it and threw the knife back at Gaius. The knife stabbed into the wall near Gaius. Afterwards, Gaius asked what Aran's purpose was. Aran answered that his goal was Regius. Gaius knew that Regius was the king's star shining in heaven. Because of this, Gaius suspected that Aran's goal was power. But Aran denied it because what he was after was the king's path. Gaius didn't understand the meaning of those words. But Aran said that someday Gaius would find out. Not long after, Arthur's group arrived on a sailing ship. Aran immediately jumped onto the ship and left Gaius. On the way, Aran realized that his hand was injured by the knife that Gaius threw earlier. Because of that, Ovum healed him with magic. He said that Gaius attacked him with Electrum. In the past, Aran also died because of Electrum. Afterward, Aran asked what had actually happened since the Great War in the past. Ogum said that the kingdom of Albion was founded so that humans could prosper. However, after hundreds of years, the kingdom broke apart because Aran's ally, the king of Albion, Puil, lost his lineage. Since then, the kingdom had been hit by endless civil war. That night, Aran was relaxing on the deck. Arthur came and invited him to a sword fight. The two fought for a while until Arthur finally lost. After that, Arthur asked Aran to always protect his sister. Arthur's group finally arrived at Albion Island. They anchored and explored the very fertile forest. The island was the only one still protected from the remnants of the war that divided the kingdom of Albion. They rushed to Avalon Palace, which was King Puil's palace. After walking quite a distance, they arrived in front of the palace gates. Outside, the entire Avalon Palace looked like ruins. However, when Aran opened the gate, what was inside the gate was very different from what was outside. Across the gate, they met two elves named Linris and Ermin. They recognized Ogum, but not much about Aran. Only King Puil and also the Demon King could open that gate. From outside, Ogum said that the person who came with him was the Demon King Aran. After that, he introduced Arthur and Riannon, who were descendants of King Puil. After that, Arthur and his group explored the magnificent Avalon Palace, which would later become their new home. Aran and Arthur then went to a weapons room. They saw various types of very cool weapons. Suddenly, their bodies couldn't move, and an elf named Epona appeared. She thought they were thieves. After learning that Aran and Arthur were demon kings and also descendants of King Puil, Epona immediately apologized. In the afternoon, Arthur and his group went to the beach area. They hunted jumbo crabs, which were very numerous. After being caught and having dinner, they all rested. Meanwhile, from the sea, Gaius was sailing to find Arthur and his group. Gaius lost track of Arthur's ship. Therefore, he decided to sail to the nearest city and the largest trading city in the kingdom, the city of Londinium. Meanwhile, Arthur and the residents of Avalon began training to prepare for war. Even though there were weapons in the palace, the number was still insufficient for all citizens to use. In the afternoon, Arthur and his group went hunting in the forest area. They realized there were other people in the forest. While relaxing around the campfire, a musician and traveler named Talison appeared. He played music for Arthur's troop. After that, he left while warning that there was a group of bandits who controlled the forest area. The next day, Aran suggested that they went to Londinium City to get things. They sailed to the city and arrived there at noon. Aran explained that the Empire's goods were all purchased in that city. They would secretly plunder the kingdom's purchases on the way. Meanwhile, Gaius had predicted that Arthur and his group would go to Londinium. He prepared a plan to capture the Imperial rebels. That night, Arthur intercepted a group carrying Imperial groceries. After grabbing the groceries, Arthur and his group immediately left there. Arthur and Aran realized that the enemy was there. They immediately took action and captured an enemy soldier, but the soldier managed to escape. Unfortunately, after checking the shopping items, it turned out that the contents were only sand. Arthur and his group knew that they had been trapped. Therefore, they immediately left empty-handed. The next day, Aran, Ogum, Arthur, and other people returned to the beach. They intended to look for jumbo crabs. However, from the beach, a mysterious figure appeared from the surface of the water. Strangely, Aran seemed to recognize the figure who had just appeared. The figure was a girl named Lydia, who came from a tribe of seal elves. She was ordered to welcome Aran and also help him. After that, they all started catching jumbo crabs. While everyone was in action, Aran found his seal skin. He took it and met Riannon, who was having trouble starting a fire. Aran used seal skins to help light the fire. That night, Lydia felt confused because her precious clothes were missing. She said that without it, she couldn't go home. When asked what the clothes were like, Lydia answered that the clothes were made from sealskin. Aran was immediately shocked because he had burned the clothes. He confessed and apologized. Surprisingly, Lydia smiled and promised to follow Aran. Ogum said that according to Seal Elf custom, if a guy stole a Seal Elf girl's clothes, then the guy must be engaged to the girl. This meant that Lydia would be Aran's fiancé and also the third in Aran's harem after Rhiannon and Morgan. The next day, a group of Kingdom's soldiers discovered the remains of Gal tribe equipment in the forest. Their leader planned to ambush them while he could. Meanwhile, one of his subordinates, a girl named Octavia, protested. Their job was just reconnaissance, so they had to return quickly. But their boss wanted to get the credit and catch the rebels. That was why they continued to search for the whereabouts of the Gal people. News of the appearance of the kingdom's armies also reached Avalon. Because of that, Arthur and his group prepared to carry out an ambush. They had already prepared a trap for them. As soon as the soldiers were at the designated location, Arthur immediately gave the signal for action. At that moment, the trees collapsed and trapped the soldiers. After that, a fierce duel in the forest took place. Because they were pressed and outnumbered, Octavia asked the soldiers to run away. They went across a wooden bridge, and because of panic, a soldier cut the bridge. As a result, several of her own soldiers fell into the river. The next day, Aran and his group went to Londinium City to watch the duel in an arena. It turned out that the tournament was very prestigious and was watched by a lot of people. In the arena, there was a large creature ready to fight, and its opponent was a girl named Rathi. Everyone was sure that Rathi would be knocked out in no time. But it turned out that Rathi could match her opponent's strength. In the audience, Ogum said that Rathi was a mining elf. Elf miners were very strong and skilled at forging in battle. Rathi managed to defeat her opponent, but she was surrounded by guards. Therefore, Rathi created a hole in the ground to escape. When she came out of another place, Rathi was met by Ogum and Aran. Rathi was asked why she was taking part in the tournament. It turned out that Rathi wanted to get Sylvanus steel metal, which was a prize for the miners. The metal was very valuable but difficult to obtain. That was why Rathi wanted to get it without mining. Afterward, Aran invited her to follow her and forge weapons. But Rathi wasn't sure about Aran because he didn't seem like a good person. Even so, Rathi still came along and sat in the audience seat not far from Aran. In the arena, the next match started soon. It turned out that Octavia would be dueling against her boss, Bublux. The duel began, and Octavia clearly had the upper hand in the fight. Because he didn't want to die, Bublux summoned a group of armies and ambushed Octavia. Bublux planned to make Octavia die. Morgan appeared in the arena and helped Octavia. The two girls together slaughtered Bublux's armies. It didn't take long for them to win the match, and after that, Morgan separated from Octavia. On the way home, it turned out that Rathi was secretly following Aran's group. Ogum and Aran stopped to meet Rathi. It turned out that Rathi knew Ogum, who was a legendary sage. She asked about the resurrection of the demon king Aran. According to rumors, Aran would rise, and his characteristics would be that he was dressed all in black, had eyes as sharp as an animal, and carried a red sword. When she saw the man next to Ogum, Rathi was surprised because his features were exactly the same as the demon king. Ogum said that the person Rathi was looking for was already before her eyes. Rathi immediately bowed and apologized. After that, Aran asked Rathi to join his group. She would be tasked with forging the best weapon ever. The next day, the kingdom sent the Rubarumu army led by a girl named Lydia. Rubarumu's armies was a group of very powerful elite soldiers. They sailed towards Albion Island and arrived when the sun was almost setting. The news reached Aran and Arthur's ears. They immediately set up a strategy. Ogum said that their enemy was Rubarumu, so even though their numbers were not too many, they were a strong opponent. The next day, Arthur felt overconfident and underestimated his opponent. He led the armies and surrounded Lydia's group in a forest area. The fight began. Contrary to expectations, the Rubarumu soldiers were really strong. Even though they won, Arthur's armies were pushed back. Because he didn't want any harm, Ogum immediately created protective magic and separated the Gal armies and the Rubarumu elite armies. When he returned to Avalon Palace, Arthur felt guilty because many people had been hurt because of his overconfidence. But instead, he was beaten by Aran out of desperation. They had indeed lost the initial battle, but had to immediately strike back. Rathi appeared and said that she had a plan. Meanwhile, Octavia went somewhere because she smelled a suspicious smell. While examining a chest, she found a group of corpses. At that moment, she was ambushed by a group of soldiers. It turned out that the person who ambushed Octavia was Lydia. They were old acquaintances, and Lydia really hated Octavia. In the past, Lydia was defeated with one blow by Octavia. Because of that, Lydia locked Octavia up and held her in a box. Then Lydia left the headquarters. Meanwhile, Arthur and his soldiers followed Rathy. It turned out that Rathy was very good at digging holes quickly. She made underground tunnels, so that Arthur and the others could enter the enemy's base without being discovered. After breaking through the ground upwards, Arthur's group immediately took action. They quietly took the crates of food supplies. While checking one of the chests, Riannon found Octavia being held captive. She quickly closed it when Arthur arrived. After that, they went out and fought the soldiers, who were aware of their presence. Luckily, Arthur and Riannon easily beat all the enemies. They immediately left with the stolen goods while burning down the enemy's base. On their way home, they met Lydia, who was shocked to find out that the base had been attacked and burned to the ground. Lydia couldn't do anything, and Arthur's group left. Arriving at Avalon, they found an empty chest. R1 realized that Octavia had gone out and was hiding somewhere. After that, R1 chatted with Ogum about the bodies kept by the kingdom. R1 guessed what all the corpses were for, but he didn't dare think about it further. After that, R1 met Octavia. The two of them struggled in a quiet warehouse. It turned out R1 knew that Octavia had hurt herself. R1 immediately became lazy about fighting with people who had no enthusiasm for life. At that moment, Octavia fainted. Octavia then realized when it was noon. She had been cared for and looked after by Riannon. After that, Octavia wandered around Avalon. She saw Arthur, who was practicing his sword. Octavia said that Arthur's movements were too rough. Because he was annoyed and didn't really like Octavia being in Avalon, Arthur challenged her to a fight. But Riannon appeared and stopped them because Octavia's wounds had not healed. After that, Riannon took Octavia away from there. On the way, they met Morgan, who had helped Octavia in the tournament. Morgan was happy because she could meet Octavia again. The next day, Octavia taught the children there to practice swords. Arthur secretly peeked at Octavia training the children. After that, he invited Octavia to go for a walk together. Arthur wondered why nobles like Octavia didn't become royal guards. Octavia said she hated the kingdom. Even her father was an opponent of the kingdom. That was why Octavia's family was massacred by the kingdom. Arthur asked why Octavia even became a soldier. Octavia answered that being a soldier was not wrong. The next morning, Arthur invited Octavia to fight. Everyone watched the duel. After fighting until they were satisfied, the two of them stopped fighting and then shook hands. A few days later, Arthur began to suspect Octavia because she was caught several times going into the forest and meeting the kingdom's soldiers. Riannon also heard similar reports. Because she didn't believe the news, Morgan secretly followed Octavia. At night, it turned out that Octavia had indeed gone into the forest and met the kingdom's soldiers. The next day, Morgan met Octavia, who was training the children. However, when asked, Octavia didn't want to answer anything. She took the children to continue practicing. One afternoon, she told them never to leave the palace. But that night, the two little children played with swords in the forest. As a result, one of them was captured by the kingdom's soldiers. The remaining child cried and went to see Octavia. Octavia immediately went into the forest. On the way, she was confronted by Morgan, who was pointing an arrow. But after chatting, Morgan instead lowered her gun and wanted to trust Octavia. They immediately went to the forest. Octavia walked to meet the soldiers led by Lydia. It turned out that Octavia had been meeting the soldiers all this time because she asked them not to disturb her. Morgan appeared and saved the kidnapped child. Once the child was safe, he was asked to return to the palace and summon their friends. Arthur and the others appeared. It turned out that they had been preparing in the forest a long time ago. A brawl broke out in the forest. Lydia and Octavia struggled near the cliff. After slashing each other, Octavia finally managed to win the duel. The next day, when Riannon was looking for mushrooms in the forest, she met Gaius, who was wandering around. Finally, she was caught and taken away. The news scared Arthur, but Riannon asked Arthur to calm down. After that, Riannon wanted to sleep. Arthur was annoyed because, at a critical moment, Riannon wanted to sleep. But Ogum said what Riannon meant was heart meditation. Riannon and Riannon were connected so R1 could know where Riannon was. Meanwhile, Gaius was meeting Talison the musician. He wanted to find out what Talison knew about the Gal tribe, but Talison didn't provide any helpful information at all. On the other hand, Riannon was brought food that didn't taste good. Afterward, there was a commotion outside because a soldier was injured. Riannon rushed to meet the soldier and treated him with magic. After that, Riannon cooked goat curry for all the soldiers. The food was very delicious and made them all happy. Gaius invited Riannon to chat. From that conversation, Gaius became interested in the Gal tribe, who were fighting to fight for hope. That night, Riannon chatted with Talison on a hill. After the story went off, the two of them separated, and at the same time, Avalon called Riannon through his subconscious. This made Riannon walk unconsciously away from the Kingdom Army's headquarters towards the forest. A soldier asked her to stop, but Riannon didn't care. Because he didn't want to be scolded by Gaius, the soldier released an arrow. Gaius asked him not to shoot, but he was too late. Luckily, the arrow actually stabbed Talison in the shoulder. He came out of the forest and returned the arrow to Gaius. Meanwhile, Riannon managed to reunite with Arthur and the others in the forest. They returned home safely. A few days later, Avalon held a meeting. He was sure that Gaius would attack on a large scale soon. Therefore, they need help. They remembered Talison's words that there were bandits in the forest area. They were the Brigantes tribe, who according to Ogam were one of the elf tribes that inhabit the forest. Therefore, they planned to go to the Brigantes area tomorrow morning. The next day, they traveled up the mountain through the valley. After walking until noon, they arrived at the forest belonging to the Brigantes. When they entered the forest, Aron's group was surrounded by Brigantes armies. One of them came forward, and it turned out to be Talison. Aron believed that Talison was one of the Brigantes, but Talison ignored the question. After that, Aron said their purpose there. They wanted to go to the Brigantes settlement and see the chief. After chatting, it turned out that the tribal chief had died and there was no replacement. There was a prophecy that said that the next tribal chief would be involved in a dispute and would suffer harm. Because of that, no one wanted to take the risk of becoming a liking head. Aron still wanted to continue his journey, but Talison didn't want to step aside either. Because of that, Aron challenged him to a one-on-one duel. Each of their groups will send people to fight. Arthur then advanced, and in the opposing camp, Talison also went forward. Arthur felt the fight was unfair because Talison's shoulder was still injured after saving his sister yesterday. But Talison still wanted to fight. Therefore, Arthur went alone for a while. While Arthur was gone, Talison chatted with Aron. There was a rumor that said that when King Quill fell, the Elf King's friend, who was dressed all in black, was not by his side. Talison asked Aron where the Elf King's friend had gone, but Aron didn't want to answer the question. Not long after that, Arthur appeared and was ready to fight. Both of them threw their swords at each other. While fighting, Ogum felt something strange with Arthur. Aron also noticed this and thought that Arthur was really stupid. After fighting for a while, Arthur's sword was thrown away and he lost. After checking what happened, Talison knew that Arthur deliberately sprained his left arm so that the duel would be fair. After feeling annoyed because he felt humiliated, Talison even praised Arthur's goodness. According to Talison, Arthur deserved to be called a descendant of King Quill. After that, a group of Brigantes approached the group. They also seemed proud of what Arthur had done. After that, Talison considered their duel a draw. Both parties decided to separate. Aron was satisfied with the first meeting. After several days had passed, Aron held another meeting. He explained that they were short of money, therefore they would go looking for Aron's belongings, which were buried in the tomb. After the preparations were complete, they left for Aron's grave. It turned out that the place was very majestic and also spacious. Aron opened the entrance to the tomb and invited his group to walk towards the room. There were magic dolls there who served as grave guards. They struggled and managed to defeat the dolls. The journey continued. They met a super huge ogre that went on a rampage. With a combination of attacks and good cooperation, the ogre was successfully killed. After facing various obstacles, they arrived at Aron's grave. Suddenly, Riannon saw a shadow of Aron's past. Aron knew a girl named Meriden. They were so close that Aron built a coffin next to his future coffin. They would also be buried next to each other. The image then immediately faded. On the other hand, Arthur started to take some of the treasures buried there. While searching, they all saw a mysterious painting on the wall. Arthur was surprised when he saw one of the figures in the painting. In the past, Arthur's father was killed by an angel and his figure was very similar to the person in the painting. Apart from that, the figure also turned out to be similar to Aron. After searching the grave, they immediately left for fear of something strange happening. Meanwhile, Gaius faced the Imperial Senate. He was annoyed that he had not been sent more armies and adequate weapons to fight the Demon King. But it turned out that the Senate was not taking the Demon King's problem too seriously. A witness was presented there, and this person had been secretly monitoring Aron for a long time. He reported that Aron was not a Demon King, but just an ordinary young man. Therefore, the Senate considered Gaius to have failed. He was even threatened with expulsion and accused of being a traitor. Gaius then left the Senate room. He was annoyed with a bunch of old-fashioned people, when he thought that it might all be Aron, the Demon King's strategy. He deliberately disguised himself as a young man so that the kingdom would not consider him a powerful enemy. Meanwhile, Arthur was planning an attack on the enemy base. After everything was done, they immediately left. They passed through a very dense forest, and in one area they stopped. There was something strange about that area. A white mist appeared, and behind it, a group of undead came to attack. Because they didn't want to get hurt, they fought with a group of living corpses. Unfortunately, the undead could fight too. Even though they had been slaughtered many times, the fog was also getting thicker, so Arthur and his friends had difficulty seeing. Because of that, Ovum intended to use the ultimate magic. However, Aran held back his intention because he had his own plans. He asked Arthur to hold on because he was about to cast a very powerful spell. The fight continued. Meanwhile, Aran began to create a magic circle and perform the ritual. Instantly, the white light spread everywhere. The sky shone brightly, and a deadly light spread out and wiped out all the undead. Ogum said that it was the power of an angel. Everyone was surprised that Aran could use angelic powers even though he was the demon king. When they saw Aran's figure, they were all shocked because Aran had turned into an angel. At that moment, Arthur remembered his past. When his father was murdered in the forest, he and his father were met by an angel who looked very much like Aran. The angel killed Arthur's father. Then he asked Arthur to hate and kill him someday. The angel also mentioned his name, and it turned out his name was Aran. Arthur immediately lost his mind. He pointed his sword and intended to kill Aran. But Riannon tried to stop him and then defended Aran. Arthur didn't care anymore because he had promised to kill his father's killer. Increasingly frantic, Arthur stepped forward and intended to stab Aran even though his younger sister blocked him. That was when Aran stepped forward and took Arthur's stab. Meanwhile, Riannon was shocked and immediately fainted. Arthur immediately regretted his actions. He pulled the sword from Aran's body. Meanwhile, Aran fell because he was seriously injured. The news reached Gaius' ears. According to what he heard, Arthur left after stabbing Aran. Meanwhile, Aran was still alive but seriously injured. Gaius thought it was a golden opportunity. He mobilized his remaining armies to invade Avalon. Gaius and his armies had arrived in front of the gates of Avalon. They started pounding the palace walls and trying to tear them down. Even so, there were no signs that they would succeed in breaking into the palace. On the other hand, Arthur was running around in the forest without knowing a clear destination. He was in a serious dilemma after what he did. After walking here and there, Arthur finally arrived at Aran's grave area. There, Ogum was waiting for him. He told Arthur about his past. Once upon a time, there were very brave dragons living on the other side of the continent. Arthur was surprised because he never knew there were other continents out there, and also dragons. As far as he knew, it was all just a fairy tale. Ogum said that dragons really existed, and he was one of them. Arthur couldn't believe it because from any angle, Ogum looked very unlike a dragon. Ogum continued his story. In the past, the continent where he lived was destroyed because of the sky collapse event. What he meant by sky collapse was when the moon shattered and fell on the entire dragon continent. There used to be 2 shining moons in the sky, and one of them collapsed and fell on the dragon continent. Ogum, who was not on the continent, was the only remaining dragon. It was for the dead dragons that Ogum fought. Afterward, Ogum asked what Arthur's reason for fighting was. Not long afterward, Arthur heard an explosion from the direction of Avalon. He wanted to go back there, but Ogum said that his presence wouldn't change anything. Ogum asked Arthur to find out the truth about the Aran Order in Gorset Aran, where all the races used to unite and fight together. Suddenly, a group of goblins appeared. Arthur and Ogum fought together against all these creatures. During the fight, Arthur realized that all this time, Aran had always been helping him in the fight. After fighting the goblins for a long time, the goblins suddenly ran away. A huge door opened and a giant creature emerged from it. Ogum said that the creature was Electrum, a very dangerous golem. That was why Ogum turned into a giant dragon and fought the Electrum golem. While holding back the creature, Ogum asked Arthur to leave immediately. Because he didn't want to waste the opportunity, Arthur immediately left the place. Arthur ran through the forest to go somewhere. He had to be fast or Avalon would collapse from being completely crushed. Meanwhile, in Avalon, the situation began to turn around. Gaius' armies had begun to exhaust the Avalon armies. They almost succeeded in destroying the gate. Gaius himself had asked for additional assistance from the center and was just waiting for time until his reinforcements arrived. When the reinforcements arrived, the Avalon soldiers' minds immediately collapsed. The enemy carried a giant gate breaker that could destroy the gate. In an instant, Gaius was sure that they would soon win the battle. On the other hand, after running tirelessly, Arthur finally arrived at the Brigantes area. He was confronted by Talison, who did not let Arthur pass. Arthur requested that he be allowed to meet with Chief Brigantes because Avalon needed help. Just like before, Arthur must defeat Talison if he wanted to pass. Arthur refused the fight because he came to seek help. Afterward, Talison asked Arthur why he was fighting. Arthur finally answered that he was fighting for his friends. At that moment, Talison was satisfied with that answer. In the past, King Puel also said something similar. Immediately, all the Brigantes soldiers appeared around them. It turned out that Talison was the son of the previous tribal chief, and he was ready to lead the Brigantes tribe. He ordered all the Brigantes soldiers to help Arthur in the war. After that, they rushed to return to Avalon. Unfortunately, in Avalon, Gaius started using an enormous battering ram. In one blow, the gate finally shattered. Gaius immediately ordered all the soldiers to walk through the gate and carry out the conquest. The war was getting fiercer. Gaius was ready to break through the next gate and continue to move forward. His ultimate goal was to seize the throne from Avalon and then become king. Meanwhile, Arthur and the Brigantes met Ogem, who was leading the armies outside the palace. They immediately departed for Avalon for a surprise attack. Back on Avalon, another gate had been breached. Now there was only one gate left to get to the location where the throne was. Gaius ordered a break-in, but at that moment, an attack appeared from behind. Gaius was surprised to see Arthur coming with a large army. The situation then turned around and was not favorable for Gaius. Meanwhile, Arthur shouted for Riannon to immediately wake up and join him in the fight. Not long after, the gate was broken down from the inside and Riannon, who had recovered, finally appeared. Seeing Riannon, Riannon ran towards him. Gaius tried to attack her, but Arthur appeared and blocked Gaius's slash with his sword. After that, Gaius had a duel against Arthur. During the fight, Gaius remembered Riannon's words that he was targeting Regius. After thinking carefully, it turned out that Riannon was not aiming for the king's throne, but was preparing a throne for the young king. The person Riannon was referring to was definitely Arthur. The battle was fierce. Meanwhile, the soldiers from both sides continued to face each other. Finally, Arthur launched the final attack and succeeded in overthrowing Gaius. In his final moments, Gaius wanted one wish to be granted. He begged for all the kingdom's soldiers to be pardoned. Riannon said it was all up to Arthur. Arthur kindly granted Gaius' request. All enemy soldiers declared themselves surrender and were allowed to continue their lives. Meanwhile, the news of Gaius' death reached the ears of the Senate. At that time, a mysterious person who looked like Riannon appeared there. The Senate knew him as the king's gardener. The mysterious man said that the king was dead. After that, he burned the entire room down. In Avalon, Arthur and everyone worked together to clean up the remains of the war. After everything was almost finished, Arthur came to Riannon. After Gaius' death, they wondered who they would fight next. Riannon looked worried because he already knew who they were going to fight. Not long after, they had a meeting. At that meeting, they received news that the kingdom's senate had been killed by someone. Arthur asked who did it, and Riannon said that person was their real enemy, as well as the murderer of Arthur's father. That person was a conspirator of the White Spirit. Not yet finished with the problem, they received news that the Golem armies had been sent to massacre Avalon. Because of that, Riannon planned to lure the Golems to the iceberg area and trap them with an avalanche. Even so, Riannon planned to ask for help from the legendary giant to smooth out his actions. The next day, preparations for departure began. They traveled toward an iceberg. After they climbed the snow mountain, their group explored a cave to the house of a legendary giant. On the way, Talison broke away. Something caught his attention. In a hallway, he saw a bunch of giant eggs. One of the eggs hatched and a baby dragon emerged from it. The baby dragon followed Talison wherever he went. Not only that, the baby dragon also found the secret door to a room. Talison and the baby dragon then entered the room, and that was when Talison bowed in pain. He saw a glowing figure in front of him, and then he was shown the secret that had been keeping. Long ago, the 12 angels in heaven were confused about why there were new angels created by God. One of the angels named Merlinus said that they never knew what God's plan was. The addition of one angel beyond the required number actually created problems. Therefore, Merlinus was willing to take care of the new angel. It turned out that the new angel was Riannon in the past. When he opened his eyes, he already saw Merlinus welcoming him. At that time, Merlinus gave Riannon the name Lucifer. Since then, Merlinus had acted like a father to Lucifer. As time went by, Merlinus taught Lucifer many things, including a way of thinking that was not like angels in general. At that time, they walked into a cave filled with piles of human corpses. Under the pile was a girl who was still alive. Merlinus freed the girl from the influence of the angel's magic. After that, he taught the girl how to make fire. Lucifer asked why Merlinus did that. Merlinus apparently wanted to change the world into a better place. He wanted the Ice Age to end so that spring could appear. Therefore, Merlinus used the Song of Creation to change the world. With that song, all the ice on the earth melted so that spring could come. But as a result of using the song, Merlinus lost his life. Lucifer then returned to heaven and met the other angels. Because Merlinus was dead, the number of angels became 11. Lucifer, who was the 13th angel, would replace Merlinus and join the 12 angels. Lucifer was happy to fulfill this. As time went by, Lucifer found out that the angels were returning to instill magic in humans. Therefore, Lucifer freed humans, as did Merlinus. He also decided to no longer join the 11 angels. He was banished to Earth and all his angelic powers were taken. So Lucifer had a form like Avalon to this day. Talison came back to his senses. After seeing all that, he knew what he had to do. He parted ways with the baby dragon and left the cave. Outside, he saw his friends struggling in the snowstorm. A group of enemies had also approached and threatened them. Talison approached Riannon and said he had a plan. But to do that, he first had to beat Arthur unconscious. After Arthur was taken care of, Talison began to do what Merlinus used to do. He sang the Song of Creation. Immediately, a snow avalanche destroyed the enemy armies at the foot of the mountain. Unfortunately, Talison was killed singing the Song of Creation. When the storm ended, Arthur finally came to his senses. He was annoyed because he couldn't do anything. It made Talison had to make a sacrifice. But it was not the time to be sad. They had to return to Avalon immediately. In Avalon, Riannon led meetings and organized strategy. Arthur did not come to the meeting because he was still devastated by Talison's death. Riannon said that he and Ogum would go looking for a weapon, while the others had to go to the Palladium and fight. Riannon planned to take back the legendary weapon, Dernwin and Gorset Aran. That was when Arthur came to the room. He remembered that Ogum had said that if he wanted answers to his questions, he should go to Gorset Aran. Therefore, he wanted to go there and find out the truth. Hearing that, the plan was immediately changed. Aran and Ogum would lead the armies to Palladium. Meanwhile, Arthur and the others would go to Gorset Aran. After deciding the next day, they immediately left. The two teams promised to meet again at the Palladium for a final battle. Arthur departed with his groups. After a long journey, they arrived at the location of Gorset Aran. It turned out the location was on a hill where several stones were lined up in a circle. In the center of the circle, there was a sword stuck in the stone. The sword was Dernwin's legendary weapon. Arthur held the sword and golden light immediately shone. At that moment, Arthur saw what happened far in the past. He saw Puel, who was very similar to himself. At that time, Puel met Aran for the first time. Aran was with a little girl who strangely could talk. This was very unnatural, because humans should only be able to pray to angels. Aran said that he had broken the angel's magic. Afterwards, Aran gave his sword, Dernwin, to Puel. The sword was very strong and could kill angels if Puel knew how to use it. Since then, they promised to continue to be friends. Both of them told each other their real names. Aran was named Lucifer, while Puel was named Regius. While Arthur held Dernwin's sword, Octavia and the others faced enemies who surrounded them from various directions. They must defend Arthur until he drew the legendary weapon. Meanwhile, Arthur himself was still seeing events in the past, while Aran and also Ogam were in the ruins of the war against heaven. Aran was seriously injured and would not live much longer. However, their struggle was not in vain because the human world was completely free from the restraints of angels. With his last remaining strength, Aran invited Puel to drive Dernwin's sword into a stone. After the sword was successfully stuck in the stone, light spread everywhere and turned the sky bright. At the same time, Arthur managed to pull out Dernwin. A vibration of light spread and destroyed all the enemies there. After that, Arthur led the group to leave for the Palladium. On the other hand, Aran realized that Arthur had succeeded in pulling out Dernwin's sword. Arthur joined Aran and the others at the front gate of the Palladium. They broke inside and walked into a room. In front of it, there was a tall pillar called the obelisk. With that obelisk, they would be in danger if the pillar activated. That was when a burst of magma emerged from below, causing their group to be separated. Octavia and Morgan met the mayor of Londinium, Creon. There, an arena had been prepared. The two of them were immediately surrounded by Golem's armies who were ready to finish them off. The fight soon began. On the other hand, Lydia and Rathi came to a place where undead and monsters were created. The two approached the place and prepared to destroy it. Meanwhile, Arthur, Riannon, Aran, and Ogum met Druk, who had been revived. Druk activated Obelix, so everyone there was immediately in pain. Arthur asked Aran and Ogum to find a way to stop Obelix while he fought Druk. They separated. After that, Druk had time to influence Rhiannon's mind. But Rhiannon met her former self, the girl who was saved by Merlinus and Lucifer, named Primula. After meeting Primula, Rhiannon managed to gain her powers and was freed from Druk's influence. Aran and Ogum arrived at the top of Obelix, but they were not strong enough to destroy it. Meanwhile, Lydia and Rathi were in danger because the creation furnace spawned lots of enemies. Elsewhere, Octavia and Morgan were also increasingly overwhelmed because the enemies were coming incessantly. Meanwhile, Arthur was still fighting against Druck until Arthur was hit by Druck's magic. His body was restrained by various magic circles and could not escape. At that moment, Druck launched the final attack. However, Riannon performed a place-changing magic so that the attack injured Druck himself. Unfortunately, the fight wasn't over yet. From Druck's body, a terrifying creature emerged and threatened Arthur and Riannon's safety. In front of Obelix, Ovum turned into a giant dragon. He attacked the Obelix with all his strength. At the same time, Aron's sword, Etlim, resonated with Arthur's sword, Drinwin. The two of them shared their strength, making Arthur able to defeat the terrible monster in front of him. Ovum finally succeeded in destroying Obelix. At that moment, in another place, Rathi jumped and hit the monster creation furnace until it shattered. In the arena, Octavia and Morgan had slaughtered all the enemies in their path. After that, they finished off Creon easily. They all immediately gathered in the garden at the top of the Palladium. There they saw a very beautiful flower bed. In a pavilion, someone was sitting relaxing. Arthur approached the person he thought was the king, but when he got closer, it turned out that the person had become bones. That was when the figure who killed Arthur's father and who slandered Aron appeared there and laughed. Aron knew that the figure who appeared was one of the White Angels, Lecter. Seeing his figure, Arthur was sure that Lecter was his father's killer. He asked why Lecter killed his father. The answer was simply because Arthur's father refused to tell him where Aron's grave was. While his descendants always protected the tomb, so it was difficult to find. Arthur was angry and tried to attack Lecter, but Lecter's body immediately moved to another place. Immediately, all the flowers there disappeared and turned into skulls. Not long after, Lecter resurrected the entire skull. Arthur and the others immediately took action and fought the skeletons. At the same time, the sky became dark and lightning struck repeatedly. The world was being shaken by a catastrophe created by Lecter. Arthur then came forward to face Lecter, but he was clearly no match for him. Even so, Arthur didn't want to give up. He had managed to scratch a wound on Lecter's face. Lecter was surprised that a human could hurt him. But at that moment, the flames burned all the skulls there. Not long after, Lecter resurrected the doomed creature, Mercatus. Aron was surprised to see the creature came back to life. In the final battle, he thought he had defeated the creature. It turned out that this creature was the one who killed Aron. Mercatus immediately went berserk as soon as it was resurrected. Immediately, the Palladium tower collapsed. Luckily, a group of dragons appeared and saved Arthur's party. Unexpectedly, Talison appeared with the dragons. They all landed far from the collapsed tower. In the former ruins, there was a terrifying creature much larger than Mercatus. It turned out that Lecter had merged with Mercatus and transformed into a new form. One attack from this creature could destroy a mountain. Ovum said there was only one way to defeat the creature, namely with an ancient spell, Words of Power. Only Riannon knew and could recite the spell, but Riannon didn't know the spell in question. Arthur and the others would buy time until Riannon could remember the spell. The battle began with the giant creature. On the other hand, Riannon never knew the spell in question. Unfortunately, Aron was injured during the fight. Riannon immediately came to him. Not wanting any more victims, Riannon tried hard to remember the spell. She met Primula in her subconscious. At that moment, Riannon knew the spell needed. She got up and started reciting the spell that sounded like a chant. Immediately, the sky lit up brightly and the form of the giant creature began to disintegrate and reveal the figure of Lecter behind it. Aron and Arthur stepped forward to try to attack him. Arthur jumped up and stabbed Lecter. The duel was over. Arthur and the others finally won. After that, Arthur and the others returned to Avalon. There, Aron inaugurated Arthur as King of Avalon. Arthur's royal title was Pendragon. From then on, he was known as King Arthur Pendragon. This is the end of Tiara Tears Season 1. Thank you so much for staying in this channel and watching our videos. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can keep you updated with our latest contents. See you in the next video.